Two Cows Gaming fans, we're back with the Raiders rebuild. This week we are talking all about scouting and getting the most bang for your buck. So let's check it out. All right, this week we're talking all about scouting, setting up your scout team, and improving your chances of getting a diamond in the rough during the off season, and also picking players that are not only going to fill out your roster, but also potentially be starters for the future. The best way to kind of do that is start with what do you need? And the best place to find that out is you go into your roster over here, and you could go to NFL rosters, but what I recommend is go to team salaries, because that's going to tell you everything you need to know about your team. I'm going to hide my camera so you can see everything that I'm talking about. So we're going to go position by position. Now, I've already done this for this team, so this way it'll kind of speed up the video a little bit. But you go into your quarterbacks, and what I do is I look at how many years are remaining on their contract, what their bonuses are, and what their potential penalty is if I cut them. Now, Gardner Minshew and Adrian O'Connell each have a couple years left on their contract. Now, O'Connell is not terrible as far as cap penalty, so if I end up cutting him, it's not going to affect me really badly. But if I cut Gardner Minshew before his contract is up, I'm going to take an $8.6 million hit on my cap. Now, it may not seem like a lot, but it's massive. It's massive because that translates to potentially a good starting salary for one of your other positions. So in the offseason, we have to address the quarterback situation. Neither one of these players is really a good bet for the future. These are transitional quarterbacks at best. So I have that as my prime area of need going into the offseason, either through free agency or the draft. It all depends on where I end up picking. Now, I'm hoping I make the playoffs, which drives my draft picks down. So I'm not going to generally get a first-round quarterback. It's just not realistic. But in the second and third round, I might get a good quarterback who can develop into a good quarterback down the road. I'm pretty much set at halfback. I don't know that I'll be re-signing Madison. His contract is going to be pretty... His contract's going to be pretty sizable to re-sign him. So we're going to look at a halfback as well, probably through free agency, but who knows? Depends on who falls to us in the draft. Fullbacks, I like to have two fullbacks on the roster. We can fill that position anytime. We don't need to draft anybody, so we're not going to waste our time scouting these guys when it comes to our scout board or our team draft board. Wide receivers, we are in big trouble. We've got one bona fide starter. The rest are transitional players. Michael Gallup's okay, but he's getting towards the late end of his career, so he's not going to develop as quickly as some of the younger players are. Trey Tucker, I have a lot of hopes for. He's got 3 years left on his contract, so maybe he'll develop into something. And then I also I signed Anthony Schwartz as a free agent, if you remember that. These are two players that I'm going to look to hopefully develop throughout the year and maybe develop them into bona fide third and fourth tier wide receivers for my team. I don't know that either one of them will develop into a full-time starter, but we have to keep that in mind. So wide receiver is another position that I'm going to be scouting quite a few players to see if I can get a bargain player in the draft. Maybe somebody falls to the second or third round and I get them, a little bit later than the first round. The tight end position, we're pretty well set. We don't need to spend a lot of time looking at tight ends. If one happens to catch our eye, We might take him as an undrafted free agent, but we just don't know. We'll have to see how the draft plays out. Tackle, I do need a tackle, but again, draft and develop. We'll be able to get a guy probably as a free agent, an undrafted free agent. So we're not going to dump a lot of resources into scouting offensive tackles. Guard is another position of need. We'll probably devote some resources to scouting guards, though not a lot. Now, the cool thing about guards, in my opinion, in really along the whole offensive line, is you can kind of plug them in where they need to go. So maybe you don't get a tackle that you want, but maybe you get a good guard who can play both tackle and guard, or maybe you get a center who can play guard and center. You just have to kind of play it by ear. Defensive ends with the trade, we got Luke Van Ness, and we still have Max Crosby under contract for another 3 years. On the other side, we have Tyree Wilson, young player. He's going to develop. The goal is to hopefully get him to be an impact player. So we're not going to spend a whole lot of resources in the draft scouting players for defensive end. It's just not. It's not where our resources should be devoted at this time. Defensive tackle, however, we have one really good defensive tackle. So we need to get somebody to put alongside of him. So defensive tackle is definitely a position we're going to actually look at in the scouting, because we need to get somebody to put next to Christian Wilkins to make an impact in the middle, stop the run, maybe generate some inside pass rush, so that it's not all on Max Crosby and Luke Van Ness. So we have to be prepared to maybe take a good defensive tackle in the first round if we get an opportunity to. Moving on down the line, outside linebacker, we're stacked. We don't need to do anything with outside linebackers with the trade for Luke Van Ness, because he could play either a defensive end, a 4-3 defensive end, or he could play a 3-4 outside linebacker. So we're set. We're set for outside linebacker. But middle linebacker, we got some problems. Divine Diablo showed up the last game, had a good game, but I don't know that he's the answer at middle linebacker. He's 26. He's kind of entering the second half of his career, so we may not want to spend a whole lot of money re-signing him. Now, obviously, it depends on how he develops. He might develop into a superstar, but I just don't see us spending the money on him when there might be somebody better out there, either as a free agent or we might have a middle linebacker fall into our laps. We'll just have to see how it plays out. Cornerback, I'd like to get somebody to play on the opposite side of Nate Hobbs. Nothing against Jack Jones. He had a decent game against the Chargers, but still not kind of the prototypical cornerback that I'm looking for. I want tall. I want fast. I want guys that can play man and zone. And occasionally I might have to shift him to safety. So, cornerback, we're definitely going to spend some resources on cornerback. And then, of course, we need to get 2 safeties. I can't justify spending the money on Marcus Epps at 28. He's only an overall 79. I don't think he's terribly fast. But, we'll have to see. Trevon Moehrig, awesome. Glad he's young. He's overall 81. He's going to develop. He's going to continue to develop for probably another 2 to 3 years. And that could be the difference for safeties. But we are going to have to spend some scouting resources on safeties. Kicker, I don't worry about. Punter, I don't worry about. Not a big deal. Those are guys that you can just sign. I don't know about you, but I don't worry too much about special teams. As long as I can kick the field goals and I can kick the extra points, that's all I care about. So, how do you build your best draft board? How do you get the most out of your scout team? Well, the first thing you do, and I already did it, was I wrote down the positions of need and I put asterisks by the positions that I need most. So we're going to look at scouts that fit those areas of dire need. So we're going to definitely look at our scouts and see if we've got, we got to look at the region breakdown first. Okay, where are the players coming from? So you look at like the national region, that's the entire United States. What is the strengths in this year's draft? Tackle, end, and wide receiver. Weaknesses, guard, tackle, and center. So right tackle is a weakness, center is a weakness, and left guard is a weakness. But it gets broken down into 4 other regions: West, Central, Northeast, and Southeast. So let's take a look at the West. The real strengths in the West are wide receiver, left tackle, and free safety. So we're going to want to get a scout who can hit those strengths, those 3 strengths. Central, we have defensive tackle. Now remember, defensive tackle is an area of desperate need for our team. So we're going to want a scout who is good with defensive tackle and defensive ends. We'll get into the scouts here in a minute, and I'll explain how that works, but we need to get a scout that can actually scout these guys effectively so that we make the right picks on draft day, because we've got to have at least one of those guys on the defensive front 4 hit, or else we're in big trouble. Moving on to the Northeast, right end and left end are strengths. Outside linebackers, again, I've already said we're not going to spend a lot of time on those guys, but we have to go with kind of what's available. So we might want to invest in a scout that can do a good job scouting the outside linebacker and the defensive end position, just so we are making informed picks, because we might be in a situation where we're just picking best available. You know, in those later rounds, like 6 and 7 or 5, 6 and 7, you might have to take the best guy available, and those might be defensive ends or an outside linebacker. It just kind of depends on what you're looking for. And then finally, the Southeast, we have strong safety, defensive tackle, and left tackle. So what does that tell me? Going through all of those, what does that tell me about my team? Well, chances are I'm not going to find a great quarterback in this draft. Just, it's not likely. There's not a lot of strengths in those areas in this draft class. I mean, we'll spend some resources looking at guys, but ultimately we might not find anybody. Now, you don't assign your national scout right now. You assign them later. But let's take a look at what we have for scouts. So we have Wendell Drake, defensive tackle and running back. We have Kristen Schmidt, inside or interior offensive lineman and offensive tackle specialty. We have defensive end and running back. We have offensive tackle and interior offensive lineman. That's your guards and your centers. And then we have defensive tackle and defensive end. All right. So the person that's actually scouting the Central right now, we're going to keep, but all these other scouts, we're going to fire. There's no point in even having them on the team. They're not worth it. So we can't assign. We got to go down here to manage scouts, and we should be able to fire them, but maybe we can't until week 3. Let's see here. Yeah, it's not going to let us. We can't assign scouts just yet, but I wanted to talk a little bit about what we're going to do. So what we can do is we can get kind of a general idea of the prospects. Let's just take a look at what's available for quarterbacks. Okay, so we've got Dalton Burton. Yeah, we'll favorite him. He's expected to go top 5, but you never know. He might fall. And then we have Jerry Altman, round 1. When it's this week of a draft class, we're just going to pick the top 3 days. We're not going to worry about any undrafted free agents. And it's very early in the season, so many of these guys may develop or get better or get worse, depending on how the college games play out. Halfback, we're not spending any time on. Fullback, we're not going to spend any time on. Wide receiver. So, wide receiver is the potential to be first-round picks. I like to pick a few of them. Actually, we'll back up here a little bit. I look for a specific type of receiver. I want tall, but I also want fast. Kind of that Randy Moss mode where you're 6'4" and you have like a sub 4.5 40. Those are kind of hard to come by, but I just start out for height, because if it comes down to a jump ball between them and a safety or between them and a cornerback, I want the taller guy to win. So this first kind of pass, we're just going through and selecting guys who are tall. Speed will sort itself out in the in the combine. It also depends on who becomes available as a free agent. But we're just going first pass. We're just going for tall guys right now. I generally look at 6'4" to 6'6", somewhere in there. And then once we start to get more scouting done, then I'll look at some additional guys. But right now, I want tall. I want guys that can kind of stretch the field a little bit and they can win jump balls. Not a lot of tall wide receivers, so we'll probably go through again maybe in week 4 when we're actually assigning our scouts to see who's available. Not going to waste any time on tight ends. Tackles, I think will be okay. Guards, it's a position of need, but it's not of critical need right now. Defensive end, position of need, but not critical need. Now, we are at the defensive tackles. They are one of our critical needs. Now, I like going with tall, big, bulky defensive linemen. This guy, Greg Spadell, definitely fits the bill. He's 6'6", 318 pounds. He's a projected first rounder. John Thomas, Cole Barton, a little too short for my taste. Gabriel Sheldon has the potential to be a speed rusher. He's 6'5", 300 pounds, so we'll put him on our board. And we'll just work our way down the line. Again, I generally look for guys who are 6'5" to 6'6", 6'7", because I want them to have the ability to swat down the ball over the middle. I want them to be able to bat that low arcing pass when it comes across the defensive line. So that's what I'm looking at is height right now. And then when we get into the combine and we get into the later part of the season, when we start seeing their stats, we'll do some culling and we're going to look for strength. Remember what I said. When it comes to the trenches, offensive line and defensive line, the most important ability that they have is strength. Everything else is secondary. We'll actually take a look at a couple of undrafted free agents too, potential undrafted free agents, because I've gotten diamonds in the rough from potentially undrafted free agents. You just got to know where to look and what you're looking for. And it's very easy for me because I keep it very simple. I look for strength and I look for height. We're going to move into the middle linebacker realm now. That is another... Well, actually, we are going to take a look at a couple of outside linebackers. Again, I like tall, fast guys, so 6'6", 6'5", 6'4". Those are the height that I'm kind of looking for. We're going to look for these guys in the middle to late rounds. You just never know what's going to turn up. You want to get a pass rusher who can also put his hand in the dirt and play defensive end from time to time. So you want him to have a little bit of bulk as well as height. Same reason as the defensive tackle. Now, as far as outside linebackers go, what's my number one rule? Speed kills. You want to get the fastest guys possible. If they don't run a 4.5 or a 4.4, they don't generally make my team. Because I want them to make an impact right away. And speed usually trumps any other ability in this game. Middle linebacker, again, I like tall, fast guys. We're looking for the field general type middle linebackers. I go for 6'3" to 6'5", somewhere in there for height. Weight, I try to keep them between 240 and 250 pounds. Anything less than that, and they're just big safeties. Which isn't a bad thing. I mean, that's what Brian Urlacher was. He was essentially a converted safety, and he had a fantastic NFL career. But for me, again, we're not talking real NFL, we're talking Madden. So you want to have tall, fast guys in the middle. Makes all the difference in the world. I generally, if I see a linebacker from Wisconsin that I like, that's who I'm going to draft, or at least put on my board, because they generally have decent linebackers in Wisconsin. Not a lot of guys over 6'5". I'm surprised. Usually there's at least a handful. And then we go to the other side, outside linebackers. Again, very tall, kind of heavier outside linebackers. Remember, we want them to be able to play defensive end in our scheme if they need to. Also need them to be able to bat down passes to tight ends. Speed makes a lot of difference when you're trying to cover those athletic tight ends like Travis Kelce and Hunter Hurst and Cole Kmet and Tyler Kraft and Luke Musgrave and all those guys. You want to have athletic outside linebackers that have speed because, one, it helps them get the blitz home. They can beat those offensive tackles, but they can also then drop into coverage and go one-on-one with tight ends if they need to. They're also not going to get taken out of the play if they get blocked by a tight end. They have a puncher's chance of getting off the block and making a play. So that's why I look at the size that I do. 6'5", 6'6", 250 to 270 pounds, as fast as I can get them. So that's our outside linebackers, our middle linebackers. Moving on to cornerbacks. Not a desperate area of need, but remember, we do need to get a guy that plays opposite of Ty Hobbs. So, again, speed kills. We don't know what their speed stats are right now, so we're going to go with height primarily. Same reason that I went with height with wide receivers. We want them to be able to get up there and win the jump ball. Now, these are not a lot of tall cornerbacks. It's not a strong class, it appears. But maybe some of these guys are fast enough to fill in at safety or maybe play nickel. So that's what we're looking at. 6'2", 6'3". If there weren't a lot of 6'2" or 6'3" guys, I would look at 6 foot to 6'1", because we also want them to be able to take down tight ends and running backs. You got to be able to absorb some of those hits from some of those bigger players. We're talking about the Josh Jacksons and or Josh Jacobs and the Saquon Barkleys. You can't mess around, because if they get into your second and third level of your defense, you're in trouble, because then they can just run wild. Size and speed make that will always win the game for you, because everything else you can kind of train. You can train zone defenses, you can train man to man. But when it comes to just raw talent, your best gauge of the player that you're looking at is speed, size, and change of direction. Change of direction is determined by the shuttle run speeds. Those are revealed to you when it gets to the combine days. That's what I look at. Tall cornerbacks, because we don't want them to get lit up on the outside. A lot of times, especially when you're running man-to-man, they're on an island against the best of the best. Safeties, again, tall, kind of bulkier guys. They got to be able to hit those tight ends and those running backs when they get into the second and third levels of your defense. They got to be able to bring the lumber, because they're the last line of defense, literally, on your defense. But they also need to be tall enough to go up and go after the ball and match up with a wide receiver who's also trying to do a jump ball. Speed is not as critical as safeties, but I still look for guys who are like 90, 91, 92. I don't expect them to have blazing fast speed. I mean, if they do, that's a bonus. But if they don't, I'm not going to shed a whole lot of tears, but I'd still like to see them in that 4.4, 4.5 range for safeties. But they're kind of, the taller you get, doesn't always translate well to speed. At least not in Madden. Maybe you get lucky, maybe you don't. And that's just the first pass in our draft board. We're all set. Now, we can go ahead and look at our favorites. We have quite a few here that fit the bill. Lots of day 3, day 4, undrafted free agent type guys who we're going to definitely look at. Because you want to get that diamond in the rough. You never know when you're going to get that round 6 or round 7 guy who all of a sudden totally changes the face of the game for you. And I've had it happen in Madden quite a few times. So you got to be careful when you're setting up your draft board. Now, it is only week 2. We're going in against Baltimore. We've already talked about the region breakdown. We've talked about how to set up your board. And that's really all I wanted to talk about today in this video, was setting up your draft board properly. We'll revisit it again when it's time to scout players, actually assign scouts by region. But that won't be for another week or 2 in the regular season. But until then, have a great weekend, everybody. Be safe, be kind, and remember, no matter who you are, no matter where you are, you matter and you are loved. Take it easy, everybody.